Here we are, Robert. The road to Brexit. Are we nearly there? On... Robert.
I can sense your frustration in the writing.
OK, so
Okay.
Here we are. It's the end of January 2020. The whole thing started in June 2016.
Yes.
But it's a moot point whether we are, in fact, there.
So I
what
think
would you
if
say?
we were actually drawing the road, it would have sort of gone like that and through there and round here and dead end, and then it would have gone over here. But actually, I think we are. I think we are at Brexit. It is happening at the end of this week.
31st of Jan.
Even the people who most aggressively campaign to stop it accept it's happening.
It is happening. Nothing can happen to stop it now. So I've got a little surprise for you. Here we are. Here's one I made earlier.
Excellent.
Here we are. So
Bong.
on Brexit night, on Friday night, you may have to do the bongs because there will not be any
'cause
official
it's covered in
Independence
scaffolding.
Day bongs
But
from
actually,
Big Ben.
there is a party in Parliament Square which Nigel Farage and his Brexit Party crowd have organised, where I believe they have tape recordings of Big Ben bonging. My favourite aspect of this is that nobody really contemplated the fact until quite late that the UK is leaving the European Union at midnight, but that's midnight Brussels time. So in fact, we're leaving at 11 p.m. And among other things, is the Graham Norton show on the BBC is being postponed so that we can all watch the great moment of departure.
The interesting thing is that actually, as the day has approached, Boris Johnson has sort of taken pains to almost play down any idea of triumphalism because he's now got this strange task of having to lead a nation which was split down the middle on Brexit. So he can't really afford to have bongs, parties, call it Independence Day, as presumably the Daily Express and Nigel Farage would like.
Well, I mean, it's going to be strange. He's treading quite a fine line. So there's going to be a countdown clock, I believe, on the door of Downing Street. He's doing an address to the nation. Government buildings are going to have lights on them in red, white and blue.
Red, white and blue. It's a red, white and blue Brexit.
Exactly. And then, you know, in Parliament Square, Nigel Farage and his crowd, sort of him, other people from the Brexit Party and sundry talk radio figures are all speaking about what a great day it is and, you know, as you said, Britain's Independence Day. It is interesting that a number of the Conservative MPs who have, not all of them, but a number who were very strong advocates for Brexit are all trying to take the same tone that you were just saying. Saying, actually, look, we recognise this is a sad day for a lot of people. We need to just go about this with a degree of humility, which I think is a good thing, actually. You know, if they can stick to it, it's a good thing.
OK, so one of the things that has happened as well is that not just that Brexit is definitely happening, this place, Parliament, becomes much less exciting and indeed relevant than it has been for the last few months because of Boris Johnson's majority.
As it regains its sovereignty.
Yeah, exactly. So as Parliament regains its sovereignty, it's actually kind of sidelined. So I'm sorry, Big Ben, we're going to put you over there because the story as it develops, in fact, the next significant moment is the end of this year, right?
Yeah.
And middle point of this year, end of June, because here we are now, Brexit Day, but there's another journey to here when a whole load of decisions will have to be made, and then to here.
Yeah, just after Brexit Day, so very early February, we get the first sight of the negotiating mandates for the European Commission, which are being agreed now, and we should see them first week of February. We're also promised a speech by Boris Johnson, again, first week of February, where he sets out what his approach to these negotiations is going to be. I'm told that the EU mandate is going to be very, very detailed, and the Boris Johnson one is going to be more thematic.
Right.
But, you know, he's sending his big EU negotiator, David Frost, out to do battle. And so we're going to get a first sense of where the battle lines are going to be.
What are we calling this? Are we calling this the UK priorities?
Yeah. These are the battle lines which will determine the rest of the year. As you said, June is when the British government has to ask for an extension of the transition period beyond December 2020 on the assumption that it's not going to get the deal done in time.
Yeah.
And nobody thinks that's going to happen.
Which is interesting, isn't it? Because when this started to come up in the autumn, there was some chat about how if you sort of got to here, you know, what happens if you get 3/4 of the way through the year? You know, you're really making a lot of progress on the negotiations. A deal is very definitely possible. It's on the cards, but it is going to take longer. you're kind of stuffed, because back here you should have asked for an extension. What happens here? You know, is there a realpolitik way in which both sides, the EU and the UK, start to say, well, you know what, we need another couple of months, but you're sort of screwed by this legal deadline?
Before the election, I don't know if you remember, Boris Johnson was given talking about GATT. Was it GATT 24? I can't remember what number GATT it was, but which said that if you were in close to securing a trade agreement,
that's
the two sides could roll over their existing arrangements. So in theory, I suppose there's that. But the truth is that the Conservative side believes in the deadline. It doesn't believe in paying more money to the European Union. In the period of transition, the UK has to take and accept all of the rules from the European Union, over which it no longer has any say.
So just to be absolutely clear what we're talking about, so from Brexit Day itself...
to the end of December 2020.
The end of this month, January, to December, we are in a period of transition.
Yes.
So we're effectively out of the EU. We are no longer a member of the European Union, but we abide by the existing arrangements while we negotiate our end state.
Yes.
And that's what we still don't know.
And in return for that, for all those, you know, think life goes on as normal. So the truth is, the morning after Brexit, for most people, nothing will have changed.
Absolutely, absolutely.
But the Conservatives do not want to go beyond that deadline. It was possibly the price of Nigel Farage pulling out of the general election. And so they've rather put themselves up against it, because time is on the European Union's side in this negotiation. And if the UK is frightened of falling over the edge of another no-deal cliff, then the European Union has a lot of advantages in this. The interesting question, and it's very hard to know because at this stage everyone's just being tremendously gung-ho and it's the early opening rounds, is that I've heard it from enough people to think it's at least possibly true that the UK actually is prepared to go over the cliff this time. And one reason for that is that the moment you say you're diverging on regulations and regulatory alignment, a lot of the issues like lorries at Dover and all of the friction in trade becomes a reality anyway. And the government is committed to regulatory divergence. So, I mean, that seems to me the whole battleground.
There is a really horrible way in which there's a kind of deja vu about this. But we've got the whole of this year before we get back to this threat of a cliff edge, you know, which we experienced twice. It felt like so many more times last year in 2019.
Well, I've still got the tin tomatoes in our bedroom.
No, but exactly. So the whole nation, and indeed the rest of the EU, was sort of poised with this feeling of danger twice last year, and we might end up back there. So it's not quite the end of a road. There is a sense of going back in a circle.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's absolutely. I mean, if the UK was prepared to do the kind of Brexit that Remainers wanted, which is very close alignment, being incredibly close to the European Union, there is the easy part of this, the easier part, which is an agreement to have zero tariffs and zero quotas, which both sides fundamentally want. That's the easier part of this game. But the European Union looks like it's going to hang very tough on the issue of also what it calls level playing field. And that means...
Which is not having the UK able to compete against the EU by having much lower corporation tax, by having all sorts of sweeties that it can offer to business, to attract business to the UK and away from the EU.
They want the UK to commit to that level playing field, which would defeat any economic purpose of Brexit, for those who believe there is one. And the UK is very resistant to this. Of course, the chances of it diverging wildly on the 1st of January 2021 are very slim. But it doesn't want to commit to what's called dynamic alignment, where every time the EU changes rules, the UK has to change. So that is the bulk of the battleground. That and fish are the bulk of the battleground.
Okay, I'm going to come on to fish. Please do draw some fish, because this is what I've been looking forward to all week.
This is the fish bomb.
That is a bomb, not a fish.
Okay, look, it's got an eye.
No.
Now it's a fish.
Okay, all right, okay. I'm going to draw a better fish.
That is a better fish.
There we are.
Oh, it's a shark. Look, here are the scales falling from its eyes.
Well, should we say that? Yes. Okay. It's got to have some fins, otherwise it's not a fish. There we are. We'll come on to fish, because there's fish, there's cars, which stands for kind of manufacturing industry, and then there's the huge service economy of the UK, which is the City of London, but also all other service sectors of the economy. But I just want to take you back a stage, though, because describing this cliff edge, the end of December, and the fact that the government, Boris Johnson, Sajid Javid, to an extent, have been saying very clearly there will be divergence and this will be the absolute deadline. There will be no extension. We have heard that from Boris Johnson before. Dead in a ditch. I'd rather be dead in a ditch than not leave on October the 31st, 2019. this is a Prime Minister who plays by different rules, is allowed to play by different rules by his party and by the country, it seems.
Yeah, for the
So
moment.
if, for the moment, but say we did get to here, you know, it's not necessarily political death for him.
I will be astonished if he does agree an extension. I really would be surprised, which means that, and I think the first half of this year is going to be a wash. There'll be lots of lawyers, lots of anger, and I think we'll get to here, which is it's the German presidency of the EU, and I think this is where it's all going to happen. I mean, you're completely right, obviously. It could all be posturing. It could just be the starting point and the open.
No, it might be sincere now, but how sincere would it be? How sincere would it be on the 20th of June when you're thinking?
I mean, I don't believe they will extend. I really don't. That part, I believe what the government's saying.
Okay.
Whether they're really prepared to topple over and stick to their hard line, that's harder to say. But there are some reasons why they might. He's got a majority of 80. He's got 4.5 years. He's got time to weather any immediate political storms. Now, obviously, some storms are so bad. If you think about Black Wednesday, people look at the government and go, no, you're no good, that's it.
Well, that is the comparison they should be having in their mind.
But the difference is that at that point, the Labour Party was led by John Smith.
Yeah.
And we're not sure who the Labour Party will be led by then, but it's not going to be anybody like John Smith. He may think he's got the political time and room for manoeuvre. And as I said, if you are refusing to align regulations, if the level playing field isn't happening, then a lot of the visible grief of Brexit, of a no-deal Brexit almost, will be there, because you will have problems at Dover, you will have friction introduced into trade supply chains, and they may take the view that this is the price we have to pay to get what we want. And the problem is, because it is the same as sort of the madman theory, because madman theory, that actually it's only if you can make people believe you'll really do it that you have any chance of breaking through. And
OK, I'm going to let you talk about the fish now.
OK.
So you've got your fish,
yes,
but the fish have opponents, right? So the
reason why this is in fact an excellent drawing is because fish could torpedo.
Oh God.
The whole thing.
Okay.
It's a fish torpedo.
OK, while you're explaining why fish could torpedo the whole thing, I'm going to try and draw a Nissan car.
OK.
This is going to be a first for me. It's probably going to look like any other car.
It doesn't look like a fish.
Just to warn you.
So look, the point, the fishing industry has become a massive and disproportionate factor in all of the conversations. OK, I'm sorry, I'm mesmerised now by the Nissan. In all of the conversations that have gone on so far, because fishing is less than 1% of Britain's GDP.
Yeah.
It's tiny as an industry. It is, however, disproportionately important in certain places, particularly Scotland, places that are going to matter a great deal. And since a big part of Brexit, a big part of the philosophy of Brexit is
take back control,
that we left behind and betrayed communities that couldn't compete like London could, then fishing communities, and the fish becomes a template for what you're trying to achieve. The government wants to show a win on fish. On the other hand, it is also, in one respect, its best negotiating card, because this matters hugely. The issue of access to Britain's territorial waters, certainly up to 6 miles, I think it is a huge issue to French fishermen, to Spanish fishermen. And so it is, and they are very worried about it, and they want this brought right into the trade talks. And so it is something that Britain could negotiate with if it's prepared to disappoint the fishermen, its own fishermen, a bit. And that's the question, because it's also the case that much of the fish caught by British fishermen is actually sold in Europe. So unless we're all going to start eating pollock ourselves, they do actually need access to the European market.
It's about 80%.
Now, is this a cod that doesn't have fins, by the way?
So in fact, the fish come right up here, because the fish are going to be front and centre, as it were, of the negotiations.
Yes.
Because it's this question of...
One day we're going to call one of these, "You've had your chips," aren't we? I can see it already.
God, not you'll have over my dead body. Okay. But anyway, so this question of trading off sovereignty and control over access to EU markets is really what the whole thing's going to be about. But on the other hand, as you were saying, that's actually, in numbers terms, very small part of the British economy. What is, far bigger in economic terms, but also as politically potent, is the manufacturing areas. So we've got this for example, the car manufacturing industry in the UK, which is a huge employer in the Midlands and the North, the areas the Conservatives just won successfully from the Labour Party. They want to hold those seats. This is no small part of their political task in the next 4.5 years. But if you take back control without compromise, you really are jeopardising those jobs and you're jeopardising employment in those politically sensitive areas.
Yeah.
What sort of a trade-off is this? It's kind of bonkers, no?
Absolutely. And it is very striking, by the way. I mean, some of the comments that were being attributed to quite senior Conservatives saying, well, we can't worry about legacy industries, which they mean the cars. And the British automotive sector is on a downhill slope anyway, which may or may not be true. I mean, it's certainly the case that I can't imagine Japanese car companies building any new models in Britain unless something changes dramatically. But you can't just go wiping out whole sectors. I mean, that's 150,000
hundreds of thousands of jobs.
Dependencies. Fish is a really interesting example because, for an economist, this is a no-brainer. You sell out the fishing industry to get a better deal for the rest of the economy, which is, of course, what happened when we joined the EEC as it was then.
Which is why it's a political issue around which so much resentment is built up. But imagine the resentment that would build up politically if you destroyed the car industry in this country.
Yeah. There is the issue of regulatory divergence, but no company that is selling primarily into the European market is going to diverge from EU rules anyway, or put itself in a position where it could find tariffs slapped on it because it's in receipt of state aid or that would be judged illegal under European terms. So there is an aspect to which the market might settle this a bit.
Right.
But there are some really, really horrible trade. I mean, someone said to me a while back that trade policy is something that the UK has not had to think about for decades. And
because we've been part of a huge trading bloc and they've taken care of the negotiations for us.
And they've been a big guy in the scene. So, anyone the EU is negotiating with, aside from America and China, is the EU has the upper hand. Trade policy is always corrosive. It always leads to big fights. There's always somebody losing out. There are always interest groups who are against, free trade as well, full stop. So trade policy is going to become a hot issue in all kinds of ways that people haven't... we've thought of a couple of them. There'll be other ones that hadn't occurred to us at all that will become really, really difficult.
So what about the UK services sectors then, including, of course, financial services, which is a huge earner in terms of, the tax take and all the rest of it. Does that also come into this very early part of the negotiations? Sajid Javid, the Chancellor, has been talking very tough on we will diverge. Yeah. You've even seen Mark Carney, the outgoing Governor of the Bank of England, start to say, OK, well, if Brexit's really happening, it might be in the City of London's interests to diverge.
Well, you've got these really...
So what am I going to draw for the City of London? Should I try for the gherkin?
Go for a gherkin,
OK, I'll go for a gherkin while you chat. There we go.
OK. It's not a gherkin without fins.
Like I'm going to do contouring on my gherkin.
So, again, one of the issues is that the City of London is not a homogenous unit. Different people have different interests.
It's not even all in London.
No, quite.
Yeah.
And yet, there is one message coming out, and it is a message that's partly been led by the Bank of England, which is to say, we don't want regulation. We have to be the regulator.
Yeah.
We have to set policy, and therefore we can't have others regulating for our service industry, for our financial services. As a result of which, it's very hard to see how you get much more than basic equivalence, in which there's sort of mutual recognition but liable to cancellations with 30 days' notice, I think. It's very hard to see what the UK is gunning for in this area. And it's, I think, to some extent, relying on a view that says the City of London, Britain's financial service industry is so strong and so powerful that we can risk this
We can survive.
Because we carry too much clout. I think the concern that people have is not that the financial service industry could fall apart, 2021, but that over time, power and influence just moves.
And seeps away to other global cities.
European capitals have made a number of the major financial services companies open hubs within the European Union. At the moment, those hubs are quite small, but they could start saying, well, actually, we'd like this bit of your trading or whatever it is coming over. It is a huge issue about which the government has said nothing very notable. And yet it has been, the engine of British growth. OK,
so what we're concluding is that really the first half of this year is where the action's going to be. Are we?
No,
we're not?
No, we're not. I think it's where it's where all
the noise is going to be.
It's where all the shouting and grape shot and anger will be.
OK.
But
then after June, where it's too late to extend again,
you think that's still in play? You think the extension is still... The
only reason I say this is because it's politics. And we have a UK Prime Minister who gets away with stuff, essentially. And how is it in anybody's interest, either the UK or the EU, if we end up in this kind of no man's land? And so that's why my feeling is that it actually does become clearer, if not totally clear, by the midpoint of the year, what the costs and benefits are.
I do think you have to factor in, though, just how powerful and strong a position Boris Johnson is in. He has just won an election. He's got a very big majority. He's got a party in no great mood to defy him. We've seen a little bit of defiance this week over the issue around Huawei, but they're not in a mood to have a fight with him. They broadly agree with him. He's going to be there longer than, if you were looking at which European leaders are going to be in place in 5 years' time, 4.5 years' time, Boris Johnson, you'd bet, would be there. But Merkel will be gone. Macron, who knows? So actually, he's quite stable at the moment, and he's able to use that stability for a while until things start to go wrong down the horizon.
Okay. So the thing is, Robert, clearly he's got a majority of 80. He's looking more secure than any Prime Minister that we've been used to in recent years. Yes. But, that's not saying much, right? And the situation's quite volatile. And also, if you look at, the UK's other important alliances, it's quite difficult to say, for example, that our relationship with...
Oh, I wonder where you were going with this. Okay, yes.
That our relationship with the US isn't looking all that brilliant in the UK at the moment. The tensions over the UK decision to let in Huawei to run our 5G network, for example, has really annoyed America. The British government is supposed to want this great US trade deal as well. Nothing in terms of the vision of where the Johnson government is actually taking us as an end point is as secure as it seems at the moment, I would say.
I think that's right. And I think if there's one other area where the rubber has hit the road, or whatever the appropriate metaphor, it is Anglo-US relations, because not only has Britain pushed back against some really ferocious lobbying by the US about whether it lets Huawei into the 5G phone network, and it was really, and I think the government was stung by the scale of the opposition,
yes,
and put blowback within cabinet,
yes,
and among
and in the House of Commons,
often quite loyal people.
Yeah.
So I'm struck with that. They've got the digital services tax, which is due to be introduced in the budget, which is coming into effect from the budget, which is going to hit the tech giants. And again, that led to threats from Steve Mnuchin that there'll be retaliation on autos if the UK does that. So there are all these ways in which we have the capacity to upset the US. And for some people, the US trade deal was the prize of Brexit.
Exactly.
Said which, it's very striking that you hear people in government talking about, the serious members of government understand that it's the European trade deal that matters. That actually all this talk about the US is great and it's wonderful, but actually it's all about getting this one. So the development of the Anglo-US relationship over the next year is going to be absolutely fascinating to watch. But then again, the US is in an election, which is never the great place to be having these conversations.
No, indeed. But so what I would say is that even though I wouldn't necessarily bet against you on us keeping to that end of December 2020 date for, having done a final deal or going over that threatening cliff edge again, I think there is a lot of instability, actually, and there are still a lot of things up for grabs.
So what you're saying
I'm not
going to bet against you, but I'd like it to be on record.
Yes, that's right. That's exactly what I'm saying.
It's been
but I have got something for you, though. I've got your Brexit dividend.
You got one?
We have got but it's not one of the special ones. But anyway, 50p, your Brexit dividend.
With friendship to all, isn't it?
Yeah.
Peace, prosperity and friendship to all.
Yeah. It's been a great journey.
Got to get one of those. That used to be worth £1.